Over the years, I have had a lot of clients who time and time again find themselves in destructive relationships, who time and time again tend to attract and resonate with people who later on prove to be quite toxic and destructive. People who very often resonate with people who prove to be quite narcissistic and sometimes even psychopathic. This video is about how to spot toxic personalities and how to avoid relationship disaster. By the way, I'm Jürgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. So, given that I've had so many clients who tend to fall into these traps, I've decided to make a video pointing out some of the red flags that you can use to spot some of these toxic personalities before it is too late. Now, with some personality constructs like psychopathy, it can be extremely difficult to spot these people because they often present as very likable and charming and well adjusted initially. But there are certain telltale signs in terms of behavior that you can pick up that can serve as red flags. And when it comes to people who have strong narcissistic tendencies, these folks are usually easier to spot. There are behavioral indicators and cues that you can watch for and use to make your assessments. So not only do you want to know about how to spot these toxic personalities, by the way, I'm not talking about relationships where you just don't seem to be that compatible, where your personality tendencies and values and interests don't really match. That's more about gaining self-insight, and knowing what you're likely to resonate with and not. I'm talking about ending up in relationships and dating people whose personality tendencies are quite toxic. So not only is this video about spotting that in other people, but it's also about looking at what is it about you that resonates and feels at home and is drawn to those particular people. And what are some of the antidotes and things to work on in yourself to avoid that? So let's have a little look at this. So one red flag to look out for, and by the way, before I go into these red flags, know that many people have some of these characteristics. And even if people have some of these, in isolation, they're not necessarily a problem. But if you see strong tendencies in this direction, and if you see multiple of these red flags, it's probably a good sign to exit stage left. So the first thing I would look out for, in addition to the obvious things, like is this person a drug dealer, a career criminal, known to be a serial cheater and violent in previous relationships? The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, right? So in addition to those obvious things, one thing to look out for is a person who has a lot of charm. Someone who's extremely charming. That's a red flag. In my book, if someone's extremely charming, that's a red flag. Now, you may wonder why. Well, of course, someone could present as charming and not necessarily be narcissistic. So it's not a full safe red flag, but very often, if you meet someone who presents as very charming, right behind that charm, you have some pretty solid narcissistic tendencies. I think it was the late author Christopher Hitchens who used to say that the person who charms everyone really cares for no one. And the thing here is the kind of superficiality and the glibness that these folks very often possess. There's often a lack of depth, a lack of substance, someone whose emotional life is quite shallow, and someone who doesn't really form much of an emotional connection to people. Remember that people who genuinely care about you will tell you what they think. People who mostly look out for their own interests or trying to exploit you will often tell you what they think you want to hear. So if someone presents as very charming, I'd advise you to look at it as this person is trying to charm me. You know, it's a strategy of sorts. Another thing to look out for is someone who love bombs you or who puts you up on a pedestal really, really early without much of a foundation. Now, again, of course, everyone who falls in love with someone will do this, and to some extent. And of course, part of the reasons why relationships work and are able to be maintained is because two partners view each other through rose-colored glasses. But what I'm talking about here is someone who love bombs you, who really puts you up on a pedestal and might say that you're the most amazing person ever and you're just completely fantastic, and they just overflower you with these positive characteristics based upon hardly even knowing you. Like it's too much. It's too early without any realistic foundation. Now, it's very easy to become flattered, you know, by someone who does that and to feel validated and to feel seen. But the irony in this is that the person who does this doesn't see you at all. It has nothing to do with you. This is a person who puts you up on a pedestal because that's how they need to see you. Because if they can project you to be the most amazing person ever, and then you want to be with them, then that proves that they are special and that they are superior. So the more awesome and fantastic you get projected to be in their mind, the more awesome they are if you want to connect with them or spend time with them. So this is not at all about you. This is a person who puts you up on a pedestal in order to feel special and unique themselves. The irony is they're not actually seeing you or showing any interest in you whatsoever. So if someone does this early in the relationship or early in the dating phase and they really put you up on that pedestal, that should be a very solid red flag. It's most likely an indicator that this person has more than their share of narcissistic tendencies and traits going on. Another one to look out for here is the soulmate fantasy. You know, someone who very early in the relationship tries to kind of sell this idea that you and this person are somehow soulmates or one person or sharing one soul. You know, again, it might sound very romantic and very validating, but the psychology behind it is if the other person can project you to essentially be one or to be their soulmate, there's no risk. There's no risk, there's no fear, there's no chance of rejection or not being validated because by implication, this other person will know exactly how to validate them and know their every need. So this soulmate fantasy is a very unhealthy one in an adult. Of course, kids do this, and teenagers might do this to some extent, and they kind of band together with friends where they try to be as similar as possible. But if an adult, early on in the dating phase or the relationship is starting to talk about you as if you were soulmates, this is this is not a good sign. This is another one of those red flags where once again it's very likely that this person is quite shallow and immature, driven by validation and the need to be special, and has quite a bit of narcissistic tendencies going on. Another really good red flag to look out for early in the dating phase or the relationship is the person who has no friends. Be very wary of the adult who has absolutely no friend, who doesn't have one single fellow adult that they have some emotional connection or attachment to. Now, am I saying that this necessarily has to be someone who has toxic personality tendencies? No, I'm not. I mean, people can have tough breaks in life. People can go through horrible ordeals, and lose touch with, friends and family, and sometimes in my practice, I'll see, middle-aged guys who have lost contact with their own friends because they've committed all their energy to their wife and the kids, and their social circle has essentially been the wife's friends, couples and stuff like that. And when they divorce, they're suddenly friendless. So you have instances like that. But I will say this, that for the most part, if you meet an adult who has literally zero friends, that is a bad sign. Now, this person might have a lot of acquaintances or business associates or people that they know. They might be charming, they might be socially skilled. Especially if you have someone who's socially skilled and they have zero friends. That's something else. But what it very often shows is that they don't really emotionally form any bonds to people, and that they tend to objectify people and essentially view them as objects or tools, for their own needs and purposes in the moment, right? So the friendless adult, red flag. Lots of charm combined with glibness, that's a good red flag. The person who love bombs you or puts you up on a pedestal excessively, the soulmate fantasy, these are all. Also, someone who moves very quickly. The person who doesn't seem to have realistic, healthy boundaries or standards. The person who wants to get married after 1 week, or wants to move in, the day after they met you, or is very much in a rush to move in together, get married, or have kids, is moving very, very, very fast. Again, this is another one of those things where it's easy to feel validated and to feel special and all sorts of stuff. But in the vast majority of instances, this is probably a person who is looking to control you and looking to dominate you. It's not really validating you. It's someone who wants to control you and who sees you as a source of supply or validation. Something else to look for is, sometimes you can spot in conversations, people who really are only engaged in conversations when they are talking about themselves or bragging about themselves, or putting their partner up on a pedestal. Like they kind of demand the spotlight, and all they ever really engage with in conversation with other people socially is that. And if anyone else talks, their eyes kind of glaze over with boredom, and they distract and they completely lose attention. If you see that on several occasions, that's a really bad red flag. Like it's not good. Something else to look out for is someone who is obsessed with externals. Who very much cares mostly about facade and appearances and validation and being better than, who's obsessed with status symbols, designer clothes, the fancy car, these sorts of things. Most of the time, then, you're dealing with a person who's quite shallow and quite emotionally stunted. Now, I'm not saying that someone who likes to take care of themselves or who puts some effort into their own appearance or someone who likes nice clothes or a nice car, that these people are necessarily narcissistic. But what I am saying is that the people who are obsessed with these things, where appearances and facade and fashion, designer clothes, where these things are like the primary things, you're probably dealing with someone again who's quite shallow and quite immature at best. If things kind of stop there, if that's their definition of a good life or being successful, um, that is not a good thing at all. Other things too. So the way you kind of, if you resonate with people like that, you know, then that's probably a sign that you're a bit immature psychologically yourself, you know. So that's an invitation to broaden your horizons and to try to cultivate some depth of character and to reflect and to develop some good values, uh, stuff like that. Um, of course, another thing here is someone who has really poor boundaries, and this is kind of related to someone who wants to move the relationship really really quickly. What you very often find with these people is that there's a sense of entitlement, and there's often a sense of exploitation, and there's a lack of healthy boundaries. Why? Because they don't really see other people as people in their own rights. It's all about them being validated and them being special and them having power and them having control. So they'll see other people as success objects or beauty objects, something that's a supplement to their life and just useful for them in a way. So if someone objectifies you, they're not going to respect your boundaries, right? So, but one thing that is a turnoff for these people are people who have healthy, strong psychological boundaries. So if you lack good boundaries, you're probably more likely to resonate with these sorts of people. To develop good boundaries, you need to develop some psychological self-insight. You need to develop an appreciation for what you think is right and what your own values are and what feels right to you and what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. You need to develop the capacity of differentiating between your own thoughts and feelings and someone else's thoughts and feelings. Um, what else? Well, if you're dating someone and you're in the relationship, another thing to look for is what's called emotion phobia. So remember with narcissism, narcissism is largely a personality style of people who have an obsession to be special, to be unique. So it's a very competitive, comparative way of thinking. These people very often have an emotion phobia, an emotion phobia in terms of being willing to feel, be in contact with, and to share any feelings of vulnerability whatsoever. Now, of course, people might not do that early on in a dating phase, but if you kind of move into a relationship with someone and you get to know them and you see that there's this complete emotion phobia, this complete reluctance to be in contact with or share any vulnerability, you know, this is a person who very often can't apologize for anything sincerely. Like they can't own their own shit. They have a hard time admitting mistakes or admitting vulnerabilities or this very strong need to be in control and to be right and to be validated at all costs. Um, Given that they can't handle their emotions really well, they'll engage in a lot of projection and very often a special type of projection. So not only, like with the pedestal example, will they project onto you that you're perfect and amazing because that per definition makes them perfect and amazing if they have such a fantastic partner. Um, of course, what you'll get after a while, once their insecurities kick in, and once they kind of, once you're not able to, let's call it satisfy all their needs, now they're easily going to withdraw all the love bombing, and they suddenly become very cold and very callous and very unempathetic. And of course, this very often contributes to the relationship partner getting desperate and trying to win that approval and to win that love back. And this is a very, very unhealthy spiral, right? Now, a lot of people seem to get addicted to this. Um, so the particular type of projection that they very often do is that, let's say that they have some insecurities or sadness or anxiety, something like that. But that's a vulnerable emotion that they're not quite willing to acknowledge or feel or least of all share. So what they'll do then is that they'll do their best to kind of entice you to be anxious, maybe be very gloomy around you and try to get you to doubt your choices and try to get you to kind of doubt whether you really have what it takes to succeed at your job, or maybe you're not really smart enough to go to that particular school, or have you consider this, have you consider that. So they're doing what they can to kind of make you anxious. Sometimes this is called hot potato. They're kind of taking their own stuff and they're going, here, you have this anxiety. Or let's say that they're kind of angry and hurt, they might begin to accuse you of being angry. And even if you say that you're not, they'll act and behave in such a way and be such a pain in the ass that by the time they're done, you're quite likely going to be angry with them, right? And then they go, see, you're angry, you're angry. That's what I told you. So if you see a lot of that sort of projection going on, that's also a really bad red flag. What you also will see is with some people is what's called emotionality. This is quite typical for the so-called covert narcissists, the covert or vulnerable narcissists who are not the extroverted, flamboyant, cocky, bragging, demand to be in the spotlight in an extroverted, grandiose way types. These are more the people who can kind of present as kind of sullen and depressed and this kind of victimhood attitude where no one suffered more than them, and they haven't been seen and they haven't been heard, and no one's recognized their special talents, and if only they had the chance they would essentially do better than everyone else because they're really so smart and so wonderful. It just hasn't been seen. It's this sullen, bitter, resentful type stuff. These folks will very often do, and they're often very hypersensitive. There's this whole victimhood vibe with them going on. These people will often display emotionality, meaning they're not sharing an actual emotion with you as appropriate, saying, I'm sad about this, or I'm angry about this, or I'm concerned. What they'll do are these displays it's more like a theater like performance. They might throw something, they might sit there and just sob and cry and be dramatic, right? And of course, while they're doing that, they're completely deflecting from any actual emotional experience that they have. So you see these sorts of like emotionality displays. That's likely a signal that you're dealing with someone who has quite a bit of these covert narcissistic tendencies. See what else? What else do we have on the list here? So victimhood, and anyone who kind of has a victimhood identity. Now, let me be clear here. I'm not saying that we can all be victims of things. The government chooses to tax you in a particular way, or someone runs over you with their car, or like shit happens in life. So we can all be victimized by something. I'm not discounting that, but people who have a kind of victimhood identity with a lot of entitlement going on. These people are toxic in relationships because they never own their own stuff, their own shit, and in any conflict or any argument, given that they are the victim, the other person is always kind of the offender. And given that they are the victim, they always have the moral high ground. So they never need to self-reflect or apologize or look at their own contribution to something. It's always other people who make them feel and other people who kind of made them do it, right? So that's one problem with victimhood is that it turns people into entitled hypocrites. Victims also end up not being very compassionate, and they end up devaluing other people because the offender or the other party is completely the bad guy, and they're the innocent pure person who's just being done bad stuff too, right? And how much empathy or compassion or care do you have towards someone who you view as your oppressor, essentially? So if you see someone who can never apologize, if someone has a lot of that "you make me feel" type stuff, it's of course this is most of us have some of that, and young people have a lot of that going on, right? So it's kind of a developmental maturity thing, as well. But these folks are not really accountable and principled, when they're not going to show you any compassion or really care about you, when it comes down to it. And they can't apologize. They can't see their own role in anything. So they don't really learn. Don't really develop. They don't really improve their own character. There's a lot of bitterness, a lot of being resentful, a lot of being angry, and what it can very often result in too is exploitation, of other people because they owe me. I'm entitled. I'm the victim. I don't really need to have any standards because these are my oppressors. And what you can also quite often get to is a kind of parasitic type lifestyle where they don't really carry their own weight. So if you sense this stuff going on, that's a really good red flag as well. So some of the risk factors in resonating with or attracting these types is, if you're kind of a bit shallow or immature yourself, you're going to be more likely to resonate with people who operate there because to some extent you kind of operate there yourself. So that's the first place to take a look. If your boundaries are poor, find someone to work with so that you can develop your own boundaries and have clarity about your own values and what your feelings are and what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. Um, if you recognize some of that victimhood stuff in yourself, you know, um, seek out someone to work with so that you can begin to develop more of a inner locus of control, as they say, so that you can begin to discover that no, wait a minute, things happen, but I'm kind of the storyteller, the one who interprets, the one who kind of makes up a story of what this means to me. Um, Things that are, you know, interesting to look at as well is it's important to be able to differentiate between someone who's non-needy because non-neediness is very often quite attractive. People who seem to be comfortable in their own skin and who are not creepy and who are not needy. So someone who comes across as non-needy will often be quite attractive. But what you want to learn to differentiate between is someone who's comes across as not needy in a sense because they don't care. Like they don't form emotional attachments to people. They're completely self-absorbed and they only see you as a potential tool for validation. Yeah, that person might come across initially as non-needy because they don't give a shit about other people and they don't really form any emotional connections. There's a world of difference between that and someone who does have the capacity to form emotional attachments and connections, but who's quite, comfortable in their own skin and self-sufficient, who might want to have a relationship with you, who might want to get to know you very much, but they don't psychologically need it. because they're more self-reliant and more mature. A lot of people haven't quite made those distinctions. So again, there's a huge difference between non-neediness as a result of being completely self-absorbed, not forming emotional connections, and not caring about people, objectifying them, versus having those capacities and being more self-sufficient in yourself because you're more mature. Um, what you also want to differentiate between is what you could call healthy self-esteem, or a healthy sense of self, and narcissism. Sometimes people say that, oh yeah, these narcissists, they just love themselves too much. It's not the case at all. If you look at self-esteem, of course, there really is no such thing as a self, really. But self-esteem is more about, feeling appropriate to life, being comfortable in your own skin, you know, uh, be treating yourself well. A person, versus narcissism is more about being validated and being recognized and these sorts of things, about being special. It's more competitive, comparative mindset. So both of these people can be ambitious, but they're driven quite differently. So let's say someone plays tennis. There's a world of difference between approaching the activity of tennis from a place of lack and having this orientation that says, if I only get good enough at tennis and if I win enough tournaments, then I'll be special, then I'll be valuable, and then I'll get approval and recognition, I can feel good about myself. Versus someone who plays tennis because that's what they like to do. Like, that's how they naturally express themselves, or express whatever playfulness or competitiveness or whatever lives inside of them. It's a completely different orientation. So someone who has more stronger sense of self-esteem is more self-sufficient. They're more likely to seek meaningful work and quality relationships. It's more a self that expresses itself, looks to express itself and enjoy life and to connect. The person who's more narcissistic is again more about the externals and approval and validation and the status symbols and these sorts of things. It's very different. The narcissist will be more into appearances and the facade. The person who's of a higher self-esteem doesn't care that much about those things. They're more reality oriented. The person who's more narcissistic will be more about getting the success object as a husband, or the beauty, the trophy wife that makes them look good and makes and validates them as a conqueror, essentially. You know, to have the trappings of success, versus the more high self-esteem person being, as I said, more driven towards quality relationships and meaningful work and doing something meaningful, expressing themselves in the world. The narcissistic person is more concerned with coming off or showing off or how things appear. The more high self-esteem person is usually more reality oriented and more truth oriented, more concerned with figuring out how things work and what's actually true. It's a higher level of integrity. So learning to make a distinction between narcissism And healthy self-esteem is also uh, extremely important. Um, Another thing to look at is, if you as a child, and a lot of these narcissistic folks often fool young people because they can show off many of the trappings of success, and if you're kind of naive and you haven't made those distinctions, it's easy to kind of fall for them. Another warning sign, of course, is a person who lies a lot, even if it's a lot of white lies. People who lie and cheat and it's just a matter of time before they're going to do that with you, right? A couple of other things that are important to look at. So, if you as a child or when growing up had, let's say you had cold and distant parents, or you were quite neglected, or let's say that you were abused sexually or otherwise. Sometimes what people will do then is to later on in life kind of approach people or situations that remind of that, and to this time try to win, to this time try to master. So they might seek out the person who seems emotionally unavailable and resonate with that because that kind of feels like home. But this time they're going to get the validation. This time they're going to get the love, right? And of course, that never works because love is not something you really get from the outside. A relationship is not really a place where you get love and approval and validation. It's a place where you get to share those qualities with another person, where you can cultivate and celebrate that with someone else you really resonate with. You know, that's so someone who's secure in themselves is more likely to be genuinely happy for you on your own behalf and might want to really get to know and to explore you, versus you need to be a certain way for me to feel good around you. It's that whole seeing another human being versus using someone as an object again. So if you recognize those tendencies in yourself, that you tend to get drawn to people who are emotionally unavailable or abusive or violent and stuff like that, recognize that, and find someone to work with to work through those issues. Otherwise it's very easy to become a kind of match for these folks. Um, Something else that's important to look at, I see very often, especially male clients who will sometimes brag about, how the sex with the crazy woman, or the women who sound like they have all the characteristics of what we call borderline personalities. That's just completely amazing. Or the female clients who kind of complain and say, look, the sex with this dark triad person. Of course, I don't often don't use those terms, but the really narcissistic person, the sex was amazing. It was a roller coaster, type. Whereas now I'm with this normal, safe guy, and it's kind of boring and unfulfilling. Remember this, arousal, emotional arousal, tends to engage people more sexually. If people are kind of on a roller coaster, and there's something about the self-absorbed narcissistic person, or even the fearless dominant kind of psychopathic type who just goes for what they want without any apology in the bedroom. Sometimes that allows people to really let go sexually and to surrender to an experience while maintaining the illusion that they're really pure and innocent because the other person was just so powerful and so seductive, and I just didn't have any chance. I just had to go along with it. This other person kind of enticed me in ways I didn't know I could. So, of course, one way to kind of deal with this is to own more of your own sexuality and to take more risks in the relationship and to dare to be more open and to let go of the illusion of being completely pure and innocent. Because there's also something really fulfilling about being able to be intimate and to have sex if you are really, really connected and really, really intimate. There's a vulnerability and a power and a passion in that, which is awesome. So that is also something to look at. And of course, if you're kind of naive, um, if if you're kind of naive, you're a great target for people who have these sorts of personality tendencies because you want to see the best in everyone, and you kind of insist that everyone is good at their core, and that person promised, and I think sometimes when people get PTSD diagnosis and stuff like that after having been in these relationships, it's the shock of discovering, how can someone be that deceitful or that dishonest or that manipulative? They just don't have a map for it. They have no idea how to handle it. They suddenly go, oh shit, my whole life was a lie. How do I relate to this? How do I so the trick with expectations is to learn to base your expectations towards someone else on their actual behavior, not on who you want them to be or how you think human beings should be, or how the world should work, but look at how does this person actually behave, not what they say they do, but look at how they actually behave, and adjust your expectations. Because with some people, you better expect that they lie and cheat and deceive and step over people's boundaries because that's what they do, right? Some some people you know, just do that. Um, and also, if someone else has not been able to connect with anyone, and they put you up on this pedestal, and you're going to be their savior, and you're going to be the one to turn their life around, that can kind of contribute to validating you as special and unique, right? So there's something about looking at our own levels of narcissism, or our own levels of thinking that we need approval and validation and stuff like that. So let's see if there's anything else here on the list that I wanted to cover. Well, a final thing, going back to the very first thing on the list with a lot of charm. If someone's pleasant and charming, you're likely to feel good around them. But the fact that you feel good around someone when they're pleasant and charming tells you nothing about whether they're actually a decent human being or not. So that's the tricky part sometimes, sometimes people can come across as attractive and charming and just be horrible human beings. But there's this psychological bias that because they come across well, or they're charming, or they seem nice or pleasant, therefore they're good and they mean well, and they're not necessarily that at all. So, anyways, I hope this was useful. I hope this gave you some food for thought. I work quite a bit with people who have gone through these sorts of relationships, people who have issues in relationships. If you want to explore any of these topics and you could use some help, know that I see clients from all over the world online. You can reach me at provocativehypnosis.com. I always have an initial conversation with people to see whether we might be a good match or not. And I also work with people for a host of other issues. All right. Thanks for listening.